There is a small stone cottage somewhere in the hills above Balmoral. We don't know its exact name. We can't drive up to it or see it on a tourist map. And yet, in the quiet way that royal stories sometimes travel, this little house has become the center of a question that says a great deal about the British monarchy today. Who gets the things a queen truly loved? Not the crown jewels, not the palaces the public sees, the private corners, the places she went to be herself. What if the answer to that question wasn't a future king, or a queen, or even one of her oldest grandchildren, but a quiet young woman who almost never makes the news? That is the claim now circulating about Lady Louise Windsor. The reports suggest that Queen Elizabeth II made a personal arrangement for Louise to one day hold a cottage on the Balmoral estate. And the more surprising part of the story is what came after, the idea that Prince William stepped in to make sure that wish was honored, while Queen Camilla was left entirely on the outside of it. Now, before we go a single step further, let's be honest about what we can and can't know, because that honesty is the whole point. Royal wills in Britain are sealed. They are not read out in public. When Prince Philip died in 2021, a court agreed that his will would stay private for at least 90 years. The same protection covers Queen Elizabeth's will, so nobody outside a very small circle has actually read what she left or to whom. What we have instead are reports from people who claim to know, and something far more reliable, the long public record of how the Queen treated the people around her. We'll come back to that record because it tells us more than any leaked document ever could. For now, just hold this in your mind. Where there is a will that no one can see, there is room for both truth and rumor, and our job is to tell them apart. Let's start with the cottage itself, and why a small house matters so much. Balmoral is not like Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle. Those belong to the crown, which means they belong to the institution, not the person. They pass automatically from one monarch to the next. Balmoral is different. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert bought the estate privately in 1852 with their own money. It has stayed in the monarch's personal ownership ever since, tucked into about 50,000 acres of Aberdeenshire hills, heather, and forest. This single fact is the key to the entire story. Because Balmoral was personal property rather than state property, the Queen could leave it, or pieces of it, to whomever she chose. A cottage on that land is not just a building. It is a piece of the one place where the most famous woman in the world could close the door and simply be a grandmother. Balmoral was where she escaped every summer. It was where the family could walk without cameras, fish in cold rivers, and eat dinner without ceremony. And it was where she died, in September 2022, in the home she loved most. So when people talk about a cottage on that estate passing to one particular grandchild, they are not really talking about real estate. They are talking about who the Queen wanted to keep close to the heart of her private world, even after she was gone. Which brings us to the young woman at the center of all this. If you don't follow the royal family closely, you may not know much about Lady Louise Windsor, and that is exactly how she seems to like it. Louise Alice Elizabeth Mary Mountbatten Windsor was born on the 8th of November 2003, and her arrival was anything but a gentle fairy tale. She came 8 weeks early, by emergency cesarean at Frimley Park Hospital in Surrey, after her mother was rushed there by ambulance. She weighed barely 4 pounds. Within her first year, she needed surgery for a condition that pulled one of her eyes inward. Her father, Prince Edward, the youngest son of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, wasn't even present at the birth. It happened suddenly, and the family simply held its breath until mother and baby were safe. Her parents, Edward and Sophie, now the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, have long been seen as the most grounded and private members of the senior royal family. They built their lives around their children rather than around headlines, and Louise grew up inside that calm. When she turned 18, she was entitled to be styled as a princess, with the full His or Her Royal Highness treatment. She chose not to use it. She remained simply Lady Louise Windsor. She has no official social media. She doesn't chase interviews or photo spreads. She rides, she drives carriages, and as of 2026 she studies English at the University of St Andrews, the same Scottish university where William and Kate first met. In a family where attention can be a kind of currency, Louise spends almost none of it. There is one detail that more than any other tells you who she is, and it is not a rumor. It is a matter of public record. Lady Louise shared a real bond with her grandfather, Prince Philip, built around a hobby he loved in his later years, carriage driving. He taught her. They spent hours at it together. And when Philip died in April 2021, Louise inherited his fawn-colored driving ponies and his carriage. She didn't put them in storage. She kept driving. People were moved to see the teenage Louise, dressed in black, out with that carriage in the months after his death, carrying on the thing he had handed to her so it would not simply stop. That is not a story invented for a video. That is a quiet young woman choosing, in her own way, not to let her grandfather's passion die with him. Now ask yourself a simple question. If you were Queen Elizabeth watching all of this, what would you feel? Here was a granddaughter who didn't grab for titles, didn't sell stories, and stayed close to a difficult private old man until the very end. In a family that had seen plenty of leaks, feuds, and public drama, Louise represented something the Queen valued above almost anything else: discretion, duty, loyalty without applause. It is not hard to understand why royal watchers find it believable that the Queen would want to keep her close, even in death. So that is the granddaughter. Now let's talk about the man who, according to these reports, made sure her place was protected: Prince William. Here is where the story needs careful handling, because the reports about William's role go further than anything that has been officially confirmed. The claim is roughly this: after the Queen's death, Balmoral passed to King Charles, who now owns the estate personally, just as his mother did. That means any cottage on the land falls under his control. For a private wish about a grandchild to be honored smoothly, the senior members of the family would need to support it. And it has been suggested, by royal commentators rather than by the palace, that William didn't just nod along. He is said to have actively backed Louise's claim, making sure her grandmother's intention was respected. We can't prove that. No statement from Kensington Palace confirms it, but we can ask whether it fits the man we've watched grow into his role, and the answer is it does. William has seen, up close, what happens when a younger royal feels unsupported and cut adrift. He watched his own brother, Harry, move from a beloved member of the family to a life in California, telling the world he felt abandoned by the institution that was meant to hold him. Whatever you think of how that split unfolded, William surely took a lesson from it. Those who follow the old code, who stay private, who serve without demanding the spotlight, ought to feel that the family stands behind them. Louise is exactly that kind of royal. She isn't writing a memoir or sitting for tell-all interviews. She is studying, writing, and quietly being who she is. If William did move to protect her cottage, it would send a message that fits everything he appears to be building: a smaller, tighter circle of people who can be trusted. And that idea of a tighter circle is where the most sensitive part of this story begins, because every circle that includes someone also leaves someone out. In this telling, the person on the outside is Queen Camilla. Let's be precise here, because this is where rumor tends to run wild. Camilla, now Queen, holds real power and a real place at the center of the monarchy. She stands beside King Charles at every state occasion. She has access to the official residences and a full role in the working life of the family. When people say she was left out of this particular story, they don't mean she has been pushed out of public life. They mean something quieter and harder to measure. They mean that in the most personal corner of all, the private bequests, the things passed by hand and heart, she does not appear, and the reports frame that absence as a kind of cold message from beyond the grave. You can see why that framing is tempting, and you can also see why it should be treated with caution. To understand it at all, you have to know the history, and the history is genuinely complicated. Charles and Camilla's relationship began in the early 1970s, before he married Diana Spencer in 1981. It continued during that marriage, something both Charles and Camilla later acknowledged. The damage to Diana and to the public image of the monarchy was enormous. In her famous 1995 television interview, Diana spoke of there being 3 people in her marriage, a line watched by tens of millions and never really forgotten. The Queen lived through all of it, watched her son's marriage collapse in public, and saw the part Camilla played in that story. Whatever the Queen felt privately, she was careful in public. But there are a few facts that hint at the difficulty. When Charles married Camilla in a civil ceremony in April 2005, the Queen did not attend the wedding itself, though she went to the later blessing and hosted a reception at Windsor. People noticed the mother's absence from her son's wedding. Years later, when the question of Camilla's title arose, there was a period where the plan was to call her princess consort rather than queen, a softer title designed to ease public feeling. It was only in 2022, during the Platinum Jubilee, that the Queen publicly expressed her wish for Camilla to be known as Queen Consort in time. Supporters point to that as full acceptance. Skeptics point out that a relationship needing that much careful management is rarely simple. So when reports claim that a treasured piece of the Queen's private estate went to a quiet granddaughter and not to her son's wife, the story almost writes itself. But here we have to slow down and be fair, because there is a far more ordinary explanation sitting right beside the dramatic one. Private family heirlooms and estates very often pass down through the direct bloodline, to children and grandchildren, rather than to a spouse who married into the family. A cottage going to a granddaughter instead of to a daughter-in-law is not necessarily a snub at all. It may simply be how families pass things down. The tabloids reach for Camilla furious and Camilla stunned because those words travel. The truth may be much calmer than that, and an honest telling has to leave room for it. This is the moment to talk plainly about how we know anything at all, because credibility is everything in a story like this. We have already said the will is sealed. So how do royal watchers claim to read the Queen's heart? The answer is that, for 70 years, Elizabeth told the world how she felt not through speeches but through actions, who she invited to Balmoral, who stood beside her in photographs, who she handed responsibility to, who she quietly kept at arm's length. Read that record, and a pattern does appear. In her final years, the Queen leaned increasingly on Edward and Sophie's branch of the family. After Harry and Meghan stepped back in 2020, Sophie in particular became one of the Queen's closest allies, often at her side at events that other senior royals might once have covered. The Queen is widely reported to have given Sophie a personal brooch, a gesture royal observers read as real affection. Louise belonged to that trusted, low-drama corner of the family. So even without a single line of the will, the direction of the Queen's warmth in her last years is not really in dispute. She drew the quiet, dutiful Edinburghs closer. That much we can see with our own eyes. Whether that warmth took the specific shape of a cottage in a sealed will, we genuinely cannot confirm. We can only say it would not be a surprise. Now step back, because this little house and its uncertain ownership sit inside something much larger that is happening to the monarchy right now. In February 2024, Buckingham Palace announced that King Charles had been diagnosed with cancer, discovered after a separate treatment. The palace did not say what type. Charles has continued to work, but his schedule has been managed carefully with real gaps during treatment. In that space, William has stepped up in a serious way. He is not simply waiting to be king. He is carrying a growing share of the work a king would normally do while his father is still alive. And as he does, he is quietly making decisions about whom he trusts and whom he keeps close. Look at who is rising and who is falling, and the picture sharpens. Edward and Sophie are taking on more, positioned as steady, reliable figures for the future. Their daughter Louise is being folded into that trusted inner family. Meanwhile, others have drifted out. Prince Andrew lost his royal duties entirely in the fallout from his association with Jeffrey Epstein and a disastrous television interview. Prince Harry lives in California and has told his story in a memoir, with no clear path back to royal life. Camilla. for all her official power as queen, is not described as part of the warm, private family circle that the Queen built and William now appears to be inheriting. She is Charles's wife and partner in the work of the crown. Whether she is family in that deeper, emotional sense is exactly the open question this whole story circles around. Because here is the thing about any monarchy. There is the formal structure, the titles, the order of precedence, the official roles. And there is the emotional structure, who actually trusts whom, who is held close, who is quietly kept at the edge. Those two structures don't always match. Right now, the emotional structure of the British royal family is being redrawn, and a quiet 22-year-old in Scotland appears to be on the inside of the new lines, while the most powerful woman in the family, by title, may not be. A cottage, real or rumored, becomes a kind of symbol for that. It stands for a seat at a table that is getting smaller and more exclusive. So where does all of this go from here? Lady Louise has choices ahead of her that most people her age never face. She can keep living quietly, finish her studies, and stay mostly out of public view, as she clearly prefers. Or, with Andrew and Harry gone and the working family shrinking, she could choose to take on royal duties and help carry the monarchy through a difficult stretch. If she does, William would almost certainly welcome the help, and the trust between that branch of the family and the future king would only deepen. Either way, she holds something rare, the genuine, well-earned regard of the institution, gathered not by demanding it but by never asking for anything at all. William, for his part, will one day be king, though no one can say when. The circle he builds now is the court he will rule with later. The people he protects today are the people who will stand beside him then. And Camilla faces the hardest path of all. When William becomes king, her role will change again, from queen to a more distant dowager position. If the warmth between them was never truly there, that change could be a lonely one. And the cottage, Balmoral itself, is reportedly under financial pressure, with Charles looking to cut costs across the estate. But a small house promised to a beloved granddaughter is the kind of thing that tends to survive every budget. It is too personal to touch. In the end, we are left more or less where we started, with a sealed will we will never read and a stone cottage we will never quite locate. But maybe that uncertainty is the most honest place to be. The Queen spent 70 years showing the world her values through 1,000 small choices, who she trusted, who she kept near, who she quietly let go. We don't need the will to see the shape of her heart. We only had to be paying attention. If a piece of her most private world really did pass to the granddaughter who drove her grandfather's carriage so it wouldn't sit empty, then it isn't really a story about property at all. It's a story about what a long, careful life decided was worth holding onto. What do you think Queen Elizabeth's lasting message to her family really was? Was it about titles and power, or about something quieter that she trusted only a few people to carry? Tell me in the comments, and if these stories from behind the palace walls interest you, stay with the channel for more.